Hey there, it's Wells. I'm going to introduce the idea of crashing in this example again. In class, I think I might have confused a lot of students, and mainly because I forgot to read this section here, that there was a maximum reduction in time of 2 weeks for every activity. Otherwise, you could just keep reducing and it becomes quite problematic. But you've got a cap of 2 weeks that you can only take off per activity. And the cost of reducing each time is $5,000 per week. So again, let's start from the beginning, just to remind you how this activity worked. You got to first find the critical pathway, which is what this question A wants you to find. Determine the minimum time in weeks to complete this project. So I'm now going to say, starting at 0, I'm going to add up this direction. That means 4 here, 4 plus 1, that now gives me 5, 5 plus 3 now gives me 8 here. But notice that there are 2 pathways to get to 8. So let's have a look. What if I went down this way? 4 plus the 4 plus the 2, that gives me a value of 10. And then again, 4 plus the 3 gives me 7 here, 7 plus 4, that gives me 11. And remember, this could have been 8 as well there. This is clearly 4. And then out of these 2, if it was 11 plus 2, that gives me now 13, and 13 plus 6 gives me 19 versus 16 or 14. So obviously the best value I can get at each point now, I'm just going to highlight that. Clearly 19 is the best. And how did I get 19? It was from 13. How did I get 13? 13 take away 2 was 11. How did I get 11? It was 7 plus the 4, and then 7 take away the 3 gives me the 4, and 4 starting. So this is my critical path, as you can see right there. That's how I get the 19. So I can then say the answer for this question, determine the minimum time, and minimum time is clearly then 19 weeks. Okay, that's how long it takes to complete this entire project. The critical pathway that we can see here is B, activity C, activity F, activity H, and activity I. Determine the slack time in weeks for activity D. So then I'll look at D. Well, D, you see, this is the critical path, and remember 13 is the time frame that by the time you get to this point, activity I can only start after 13 minutes, right? So that means these guys have a deadline of 13. Now, if you work backwards, 13 take with a duration of 3 gives me the latest start time for G, which is 10. So G can start at 10 if they want, or, and same thing if we go all the way back to D, D can start the time, since it's duration of 1, 10 take away 1 gives me 9. So that tells me that the latest start time for D is 9, whilst the earliest start time, if we started at 0 and we went with activity A, which is 4 duration, that means earliest start time that D can start is 4, and they can also start at 9. So that means they have a float time or slack time of 9 take away 4, which is 5. Okay, so I now know activity D has a slack time of 5 weeks. They don't have to start immediately, and they don't have to start until 9 weeks in, and they can still make it to 10 weeks, and then plus another 3 weeks. They can still not delay the entire process. By the time they get 13 plus 6 is still 19. So that's why activity D has a nice slack there of 5 weeks. Okay, so this is all to do with exercise A, B, and C have all to do with exercise well, actually even there, exercise 15D. Okay, that's what it's related to, EST and LST, but you don't have to do the boxes. And then part D says, which of these activities, if reduced in time individually, would not result in an earlier completion of the project? Now, which activities can I reduce? It says here, the activities that can be reduced are, in time, is A, C, E, F, and G. So remember, in this particular scenario here, the builders want to speed up the project. And how do they do that? You can only speed it up by reducing the minimum time required. Minimum time required is 19 weeks. And they're saying that the only activities that can be reduced are A, G, C, E, and F. So C, E, and F. Okay, so those are my 5 activities or 5 edges that I can reduce. Now they're asking, out of those 5, which ones do not have a result in an early completion of the project? Well, anything that's not on the critical pathway. Okay, so the critical pathway was again B, C, F, H, I. If you reduce them, it directly affects the overall result. So for example, I, that's a critical pathway there. If I reduce the 6 down to, say, 3, then it becomes 13 plus 3 gives me 16 weeks instead. So anything that you reduce on that yellow line will affect the overall. So it means that even if I reduce this G by 2 and it becomes 1, it doesn't matter, because 10 plus 1 still only requires 11 weeks, but you still have to wait for all of these guys, which takes 13 weeks. That's why anything that's non-critical doesn't really matter. So the answer for this one would have to be activity A, activity G, and activity E are the only ones that don't seem to affect the overall. Okay, well, let's now go to pretty much exercise 15E now. So this component is 15E, crashing. So in class, I actually forgot to read this part, and that's why my reduction kept going infinitely. But here we go. We know that every time you reduce, it's $5,000 per week, and you can only do a maximum reduction of 2 weeks for any of these activities. Okay? Now, they want you to find the minimum time in weeks that you can reduce it by, right? How I like to do it, okay, so I'm just going to rub all this out just to focus on what we want, okay? So remember, right now, the critical pathway was B, C, F, H, I, right? What I know is the ones that I can reduce is A, E, C, F, and G. What I like to do is I like to do the maximum, work out the worst case scenario. Okay, so worst case scenario, and I work with the ones that are on the critical path straight away. So on the critical path, I've got C and I've got F. Maximum amount that I can reduce is 2. So 3 take away 2, now that becomes 1. 4 take away 2, that becomes 2. So that is what I can reduce definitely that affects, instead of getting 19, I'm going to reduce it overall. So what did I reduce it down by? So remember, I took off 2 each. It means I took off 4 already. But if you have a think about it, it becomes B, which is 4, 4 plus the 1, which is now 5, 5 plus the 2 is now 7, and 7 plus the 2 gives me 9 here, and the 9 plus 6 gives me an overall 15. So what I've been able to do is I've been able to reduce it by 4 weeks already. Okay, what's the problem here? So I've reduced it maximally on the critical line. The only thing I have to be worried about now is checking, has that also changed the critical path? See, if I've done that, this is 1, this is 2, the resulting value was 7 to get there, right? But if we look at the overall now, let's have a look. If I go from B to this point, that was 4. But then if I went along E instead, that now gives me another 4, which is 8. So that technically would mean this is the new critical pathway, because 8 is bigger than 7. True? So I need more time to wait for E to finish before I can move on to H. So that means E takes 8 minutes to finish, and then H can then start. So 8 plus 2 is 10. 10 plus 6 is still 16. So I don't have the 15. I can't get 15 weeks yet. So how do I make sure I can get 15 weeks? Well, I would have to reduce E. And because E is a possible one that I can reduce, remember they said you can reduce A, C, E, F, and G. Well, if we have a look at it, can you see that I've already reduced the C and F in the worst case scenario? And I knew that that would make E still a problem, so I had to change E now to make it down to 7. Okay, so I would reduce E down to 7. Oh, sorry, down to take off 1 to make it 3, because 4 plus 3 also gives me 7. That means I will finish by 15 this way. Your question might be, in this case here, why didn't I reduce it down to 2? Right, because I can reduce E by 2, right? So why didn't I reduce from 4 weeks down to 2 weeks? Because if I did that, see, there's no point. 4 plus 2 is 6, but 6 is smaller than 7. I will still need 7 weeks for these guys to finish. Then H will still continue, and it'll still be 9 weeks, plus the 6 weeks is still 15. So I just spent money reducing E down to 2 for nothing. See what I mean? So one of the aims, actually, is that the tip usually I would give is try to make as many critical pathways as you can. And what I can see is if I reduce E down to 3, that will now have 7 as my main critical path, and this whole entire line also becomes a critical pathway as well. Okay, now notice here, once I've got that sorted, I look at, well, 7 plus 2 gives me 9, right? I'm going to circle this. The one last thing I need to check is, remember there was A and G. Well, if you think about it, 4 plus the 1 plus the 3, that gives me 8. So at the end of the day, the maximum value of the top line is 8, yet I'm already at 9. So really, it doesn't matter if I reduce G or A, this value is the max value I can get, yet the value that I'm going to use is 9. So really, I don't need to do anything with G or A, because it won't affect it overall. The overall result is still going to be 15. So if you have a look, even if I spent more money and I said reduce G down to 2, see, the overall result is 4 plus the 1 is 5, 5 plus the 2 is 7. It doesn't matter. I still need H to complete in 9 weeks. Or at least I still need 9 weeks for all of these guys to finish. See what I mean? Like the 9 weeks is still going to be the one I need for it to all be done before I can start. So before the activity I can start. So there's no point reducing G or A, because at the end of the day, we're still waiting for these guys at 9 weeks. And I couldn't reduce the 9 weeks any further because I've done the maximum for C and F. And if I reduce E any further, then that changes the critical pathway. Or it doesn't change anything either, because at 6, I'm still going to follow with 7. So that's why I know 15 weeks is clearly the answer because of the restrictions I currently have. There's no point dealing with G and A. So what would my maximum costs be? So let's have a think. In question E, asked minimum time in weeks. Well, I know the minimum time in weeks is 15 weeks now. That's how much I can reduce it down to. And how did I get 15 weeks? Well, notice I changed C. C was a minus 2 weeks. F, I minus 2 weeks. E, I didn't minus 2, I minus 1, because if I minus 2, it was just a waste of money there. And then I knew that A and G, there was no point in subtracting anything. So how much did I have to reduce? I had to reduce in total of 5 weeks. And it says here that the cost was $5,000 per week. So that means the minimum additional cost has to be then 5 times 5,000. So 5 changes times the $5,000 per change. That gives me now $25,000 cost. And I will reduce it down from 19 down to 15 weeks. And that's the best scenario I can do. So that's the bang for buck. Even if I spent more money and reduced other activities, it doesn't matter. It still takes 15 weeks to complete the project. Okay, so that's what made the activity a bit confusing. I forgot the fact that it had a maximum reduction of 2 weeks. And that's how you would do this activity here. I'm going to do another video as well involving the your exam questions here to do with crashing, so that you get a better idea of how I do them. Okay.